The phone rang at 2 in the morning in Bumpy Johnson's Harlem apartment. On the other end was Billie Holiday, the greatest jazz vocalist alive, crying. Her manager had just stolen $3,000 from her, put his hands on her, and threatened to end her career if she said anything. 6 hours later, that manager was in the hospital with 2 broken ribs and a shattered jaw. And what happened in between wasn't just about revenge. It was about what happens when you mistake Harlem's protector for someone who looks the other way. February 18th, 1958, 2:17 in the morning. Most men would have ignored a phone call at that hour. Nobody calls at 2 a.m. with good news. But Bumpy picked up on the second ring, and what he heard made his jaw tighten in a way that people who knew him understood meant someone was about to have a very bad day. "Bumpy," the voice was barely a whisper, choked with tears. "It's Billie." Billie Holiday, Lady Day, the voice that could fill the Apollo Theater 3 nights straight, the woman whose songs felt like church and heartbreak at the same time. "What happened?" Bumpy's voice was calm, controlled, but his hand was already reaching for his jacket. "John, he took it all. Everything from the Apollo gig. $3,000. He said I owed him." Her voice broke. "He put his hands on me, Bumpy, and I can't do this anymore." John Levy, Billie's manager, the man who was supposed to protect her, had been bleeding her dry for 2 years, and tonight he'd crossed the line that even the music industry's code of silence couldn't ignore. To understand what happened that night, you need to understand who Billie Holiday was to Harlem in 1958, and more importantly, who she was to Bumpy Johnson. Billie Holiday wasn't just another singer. By the late 50s, she was royalty. Her voice could make grown men cry. Strange Fruit, God Bless the Child, Lover Man. These weren't just songs. They were Harlem's soul put to music. But here's what the history books don't tell you. Billie Holiday was broke. Not struggling, not tight on money. Broke. Despite selling out every venue she touched, despite records that went gold, despite being one of the most famous voices in America, Billie Holiday couldn't afford to pay her rent. Why? One name, John Levy. Levy was a bass player turned manager who'd wrapped himself around Billie's career like a python in 1956. Smooth talker, sharp dresser, knew all the right people. He promised to handle her business, protect her from the vultures in the music industry, get her the money she deserved. Instead, he became the worst vulture of all. The contract Levy had Billie sign gave him 50% of everything she earned, not 15% like a normal manager, not even 25%, 50%. Half of every dollar Billie made singing her heart out went straight into John Levy's pocket.
But that wasn't even the worst part. Levy controlled everything. He decided which gigs she took, when she performed, who she could talk to. He monitored her phone calls. He kept her isolated from friends who might ask questions. And whenever Billie pushed back, whenever she asked where her money was going, Levy had the same answer. "You owe me. The advances, the expenses, the legal fees. You're in debt." It was a lie. Billie Holiday wasn't in debt. She was being robbed. Bumpy Johnson had known Billie since she was 19 years old, singing in small clubs on Lenox Avenue for tips and free drinks. He'd watched her rise, watched her voice mature into something transcendent. And when she'd started working with Levy, Bumpy had warned her, "That man's got snake eyes," Bumpy had said. "You want me to look into him?" But Billie had waved him off. She thought she could handle it. She thought having someone manage her business would let her focus on her music. By the time she realized her mistake, Levy had his claws in so deep she couldn't see a way out. Bumpy had watched from a distance, waiting, because that's what Bumpy did. He watched, he waited, and when the time was right, he moved. The music industry in 1958 was a predator's paradise. Black artists, no matter how talented, were treated like disposable commodities. Record labels stole royalties, managers embezzled earnings, club owners paid pennies on the dollar. And nobody did anything about it, because the artists had no power, no leverage, no protection, except in Harlem. In Harlem, they had Bumpy Johnson. John Levy thought he was untouchable. He'd been managing Billie Holiday for 2 years, and in that time, he'd stolen an estimated $200,000 from her. He'd isolated her from her friends, controlled her finances, and kept her dependent on him through a combination of manipulation and cocaine, which he supplied, then charged her for. January 1958. Billie Holiday played a week-long engagement at the Apollo Theater. 7 sold-out shows, 1,500 people per night. The gross was $25,000. Levy took his 50% and deducted expenses. Billie's cut was $900. Billie knew something was wrong. She'd been around the music business long enough to know the math didn't add up. But when she confronted Levy, he had an answer ready. "You think this is a game?" Levy said, his voice dropping to something cold and threatening. "You think you can just walk away? Read your contract, Billie. I own you for the next 3 years. You try to leave, I'll sue you for breach. You'll never work again." That was the game. Keep her scared, keep her isolated, keep her thinking she had no options. But on February 17th, 1958, something changed. Billie had just finished a gig at Small's Paradise. 2 shows, packed house. Her voice was perfect that night, hitting notes that made people forget they were sitting in a jazz club and not witnessing something holy. The owner paid Levy $3,000 in cash. Standard deal. Billie was in your dressing room when Levy walked in, counting bills. "What's my cut?" Billie asked. Levy didn't even look up. "You don't have a cut. You owe me for the hotel, the transportation, the expenses." "What expenses? I took the subway here. I'm staying with a friend." Levy's face hardened. "Don't start with me, Billie. You know how this works." "I want my money, John." That's when Levy made his mistake. He grabbed her arm, hard enough to leave bruises, hard enough to hurt. "You'll get what I give you. Now shut your mouth and be grateful I'm still willing to work with a washed-up junkie." Billie jerked away, but Levy's grip tightened. For a moment, they stood there, and Billie saw something in his eyes that terrified her. This man, who she'd trusted with her career, her money, her life, was capable of real violence. Levy let her go, pocketed the cash, and walked out. "Be ready for the Boston show on Thursday. And Billie, if you tell anyone about this, I'll make sure you never sing again." Billie waited until she heard his footsteps fade down the hallway. Then she went to the payphone on the corner of 135th Street and made a call she'd been avoiding for 2 years. What John Levy didn't know, what he couldn't know, is that Bumpy Johnson had been documenting everything for 18 months. See, when Bumpy had warned Billie about Levy back in 1956 and she'd declined his help, Bumpy hadn't walked away. He just changed tactics. Instead of intervening directly, he'd started watching, listening, gathering evidence. Bumpy had people everywhere. The coat check girl at Small's Paradise, she worked for Bumpy. The bartender at the Apollo, Bumpy's cousin. The booking agent who set up Billie's shows, owed Bumpy a favor from 1952. Every time Levy picked up Billie's payment, someone was watching. Every time he pocketed cash that should have been hers, someone was counting. Every time he threatened her, someone was listening. Bumpy had a ledger in his office with every transaction documented. Dates, amounts, venues, witnesses. He had testimony from club owners about what they actually paid versus what Levy claimed. He had hotel receipts proving Levy's expenses were fabricated. He had everything needed to destroy John Levy's career and freedom. But Bumpy was waiting for something specific. He was waiting for Levy to cross the line from theft to violence. Because theft, the music industry could ignore. Violence against Harlem's Lady Day, that they couldn't ignore. When Billie called at 2:17 a.m. crying about Levy putting his hands on her, Bumpy knew it was time. He made 3 calls. The first was to Illinois Gordon, his most trusted associate. "Get the car. We're going to the Woodside Hotel." That's where Levy was staying. Bumpy knew because he'd had someone follow Levy for the past 6 months. The second call was to a doctor named Clarence Moore, who ran a practice in Sugar Hill and owed Bumpy for keeping his son out of jail. "I need you on standby. Someone's going to need medical attention in about 4 hours. The third call was to Billie. "Where are you right now?" "I'm at Sarah's." Sarah Vaughan, another jazz singer, one of Billie's few friends Levy hadn't managed to isolate her from. "You stay there. Don't answer the phone. Don't open the door for anyone except me. This ends tonight." At 3:45 a.m., Bumpy Johnson and Illinois Gordon arrived at the Woodside Hotel. The night clerk, a young man named Marcus, looked up from his magazine and immediately went pale. "Mr. Johnson," Marcus stammered. "How can I—" "John Levy, what room?" "I can't give out." Bumpy placed a $50 bill on the counter. "What room?" "412. The door to room 412 wasn't locked. Levy had been drinking. A bottle of scotch sat half empty on the nightstand, and he'd gotten careless. When Bumpy and Illinois walked in, Levy was counting money. The $3,000 from Small's Paradise spread out like that playing Monopoly. Levy looked up, saw Bumpy Johnson standing in his doorway, and for the first time in 2 years, he felt something he hadn't felt since he was a kid: real fear. "Bumpy," Levy said, trying to sound casual but failing. "What's this about?" Bumpy closed the door behind him. He didn't rush, didn't raise his voice. He just walked slowly into the room, his eyes never leaving Levy's face. "You put your hands on Billie Holiday tonight." Levy's jaw tightened. "That's between me and my client. This is business, Bumpy. You got no right." $3,000, Bumpy interrupted, gesturing to the money on the bed. "Billie's money. My money. Check the contract. You get nothing." Bumpy's voice was quiet, but it carried a weight that made the room feel smaller. "You've been stealing from Billie Holiday for 2 years. I know how much. I know when. I know where. I got documentation of every dollar, every lie, every threat." Levy stood up, trying to puff out his chest, trying to look bigger than he was. "You can't prove anything, and even if you could, you think anyone cares? She's a junkie, a washed-up—" He didn't see Illinois move. One moment, Illinois was standing by the door. The next, he had Levy by the throat, slamming him against the wall hard enough to crack the plaster.
"Let him go," Bumpy said calmly. Illinois released Levy, who crumpled to the floor, gasping for air. Bumpy pulled a chair over and sat down, looking at Levy like a scientist examining a particularly unimpressive specimen. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to give me that $3,000. You're going to give me another $50,000 to cover what you've stolen from Billie over the past 2 years. I don't have $50,000. Then you better find it. Sell your car, borrow from your friends. I don't care. You got 48 hours. And if I don't?" Bumpy leaned forward. "Then I give this ledger," he pulled out a small black notebook from his jacket, "to the IRS. Every unreported dollar you stole, every fraudulent expense, every piece of evidence they need to send you to federal prison for tax evasion. That's 10 years minimum." Levy's face went white. Bumpy opened the notebook, started reading. "January 12th, 1957. Apollo Theater gross, 14,400. You reported 4,000. January 19th, Blue Note gross, 2,800. You reported 200. Should I keep going? Because I got 18 months of this." The room went silent, except for Levy's ragged breathing. "But here's the thing, John," Bumpy continued, his voice dropping even lower. "The money's just business. What you did tonight, putting your hands on Billie, that's personal. And in Harlem, when you disrespect one of ours, there's a price." Bumpy nodded to Illinois. What happened next happened fast. Illinois picked Levy up, held him against the wall, and Bumpy stood up slowly. He looked at Levy for a long moment, then said 5 words that Levy would remember for the rest of his life. "You don't touch Lady Day." Then Bumpy hit him. Not wild, not angry, calculated. 2 punches to the ribs, precise enough to crack them but not puncture a lung. Then 1 more to the jaw, hard enough to dislocate it. Levy collapsed to the floor, blood streaming from his mouth, gasping in pain. Bumpy picked up the $3,000 from the bed, folded it neatly, and put it in his pocket. Then he looked down at Levy one more time. "Dr. Moore is downstairs. He'll make sure you live. But when you get out of that hospital, you're going to sign a document releasing Billie Holiday from her contract. No penalties, no fees, nothing. Then you're going to leave New York and never come back." Bumpy paused. If I ever hear you're managing another artist, if I ever hear you're in Harlem, if I ever even hear your name again, well, next time I'll let Illinois finish the job." By 6:15 a.m., as the sun was rising over Harlem, John Levy was in Lenox Hill Hospital. Dr. Moore had stabilized him, called an ambulance, and told the police it was a robbery. Levy, terrified and in pain, agreed. Word spread through the music industry within days. John Levy had been handled. The details varied depending on who was telling the story, but the core message was clear. Bumpy Johnson had put a manager in the hospital for stealing from and abusing Billie Holiday. Other managers who'd been running similar scams on black artists suddenly got very careful. Club owners who'd been shorting performers started paying full rates. The predatory contracts that had been standard practice for years started disappearing. By March 1, 1958, John Levy had signed the release documents and left New York for Los Angeles. He never managed another major artist. He tried to restart his career on the West Coast, but word had spread. Nobody wanted to work with the man who'd gotten on Bumpy Johnson's bad side. Billie Holiday performed at the Apollo Theater 3 weeks later, sold out, standing ovation, and for the first time in 2 years, she kept every dollar she earned. After the show, she went to Small's Paradise, where Bumpy was at his usual table. "Thank you," she said simply. Bumpy just smiled. In Harlem, we'd take care of our own. Billie would struggle with her demons for the rest of her life. The drugs, the abusive relationships, the racism that poisoned the music industry. She died just over a year later, in 1959, far too young. But for those final months, she was free from John Levy's control, and she sang with a power that reminded everyone why she was called Lady Day. The story of what happened that night became legend in Harlem, told in jazz clubs and barbershops for decades. It wasn't just about revenge or violence. It was about something deeper. The understanding that in a world designed to exploit and destroy black talent, there were still people willing to stand up and say, "Not here, not in Harlem." Bumpy Johnson proved something that night that most people miss. Power isn't just about who you can hurt. It's about who you're willing to protect. It's about drawing a line and making it clear that crossing it has consequences. In Harlem, respect wasn't given, it was earned. And Bumpy Johnson earned his, protecting the people who needed it most, Lady Day included.